across the world, we are suffering from an overpopulation crisis. Countries which have birth rates of over 2 children per woman are pushing immigration down the throats of the rest of the world. The wealthiest individuals are purchasing property in whichever countries they can, trying to leverage someone else's assets to maintain wealth for themselves and their families. This has led to a housing crisis across much of the globe. At popular request, today on the Musings of Rin, I will be discussing the theory behind the housing crisis. This is a very sensitive topic, and it raises a lot of hard feelings. I'll try and be as sensitive as possible, so bear with me here, guys. So what is overpopulation? The simplest explanation is that overpopulation occurs when you have a community, city, region, or country that cannot produce resources to keep their people alive. You use resources like food, housing, and medical facilities to take care of their needs. Borders are drawn around land and resources already, and these are being used to keep an existing population alive. The folks living there are dependent on those resources, and they measure their own needs and excesses by what they know of it. Nobody is going to know better than the one owning, watching, supervising, and managing the resources what those levels are, and how they're allocated. Outsiders typically covet resources and make assumptions on what's there, and foreign trade exists when countries share excesses amongst each other. When you are thinking about resources, there's nothing really undiscovered and waiting to be claimed anymore. Everything's either already allocated or being protected for environmental reasons, so the entire globe could consider itself overpopulated. Most of the world provides jobs to earn pay to exchange for resources. There's a limited financial excess for social aid and charities, but when there's no excess in a community, there are no charitable donations. The folks dependent on charities require compassionate, wealthy people to exist to take care of them. As costs rise and former donators are removed from their jobs, the number of available charitable donations disappear too. Nobody wants to be left at the mercy of people who don't care if you live or die, so most people know that to access resources and survive, you actually have to be working. Therefore, at a practical level, we can quantitatively measure overpopulation in terms of unemployment. Publicly reported unemployment rates across the globe show there is no country with 0% unemployment. So again, we see the globe is already overpopulated. Different countries measure unemployment in different ways. Odd, right? You would think it should be easy to calculate. You count up all the peoples that you've got living there that are able to work, and then minus the number of jobs you have in your country. You divide the result by the number of working peoples, and you come up with a percentage of folks who are not working, and by definition are unemployed. Now, I live in Canada. Here we do things a little differently. The reported unemployment rate is the number of people collecting unemployment insurance. Basically, someone in government decided because there's a group of people who are not looking for work, like housewives, wealthy teenagers, senior citizens who retire early, or folks that got dismissed for practicing a crime or breaking the law who are not qualified to work, we can't use that simple unemployment rate measure. Simply put, it's bullshit. As someone who's been in the unemployed community, I can confidently tell you the measurement is not even remotely accurate. The approach doesn't even remotely work for people who are laid off for no fault of their own. What about the new graduating students who have never worked at all? Doesn't work for them either. Failing businesses don't keep paying workers, not even the good ones. They don't create new jobs for new peoples. If you let go 10,000 people due to a large business failing, but there's only 20 jobs in the city, and over the next 2 years we can only create 1,000 jobs elsewhere, there's still going to be a lot of people who get disqualified from work that should never have been abandoned. Many contract workers and part-time employees don't qualify for unemployment insurance, so they're also not included in those numbers. We sit out here looking at the managers who are destroying these businesses being allowed to move on and take positions elsewhere by practicing nepotism and racism, while good, lowly, working-class peoples have been exiled for someone else's failing. We're qualified, hardworking, good people, so why are our skill sets sitting here being wasted? Why are we being exiled and our resources being collected by somebody else? Homeless people, welfare folks, natives living on reservations, and illegal immigrants, they're also in the country. But they're not being counted either. I'm sure they're interested in working in Canada, though. So what is Canada's real unemployment rate? Publicly, it's reported to be between 5 and 7%. Remember, this is just the amount of Canadians collecting unemployment insurance while they were looking for other work. Think of it as the group being apologized to for being dismissed from their jobs for absolutely no reason. You get about 9 months to find work again before you get socially eliminated from Canada and get removed from the count. If there are no jobs, it doesn't matter how great a worker you are, you still get considered trash. Not very nice, huh? In Canada, you are legally allowed to work at age 15. Retirement age is traditionally 65, but some people retire earlier. Employers in general are legally allowed to keep employing you until you're dead, though, so there is no max age. For the purposes of this exercise, I've looked at our census records for folks between the ages of 15 and 70. There are 20 million jobs in Canada right now, but there are 28 million legal working age peoples. So we have around 8 million people who could want work that cannot access it. This sets our unemployment rate closer to 29%. Notice our census records won't include any foreign illegal immigrants. These people are not registered as being in Canada, so the actual number of people in Canada looking for work is even higher than that. So this means our country is nearing 30% unemployment. So at least 1 in 3 Canadians cannot find work. So Canada is classified as overpopulated. In fact, our overpopulation limits are starting to approach worse than being in Africa. We have one of the worst rates globally. So yeah, our immigration levels are so high and our job markets are so low. What the hell's going on? How does this affect our housing crisis? The number of jobs in your country directly influences the amount of homes your population can support. Somebody has to pay for those resources used by the households, right? Most houses require a minimum household income to pay for it. In North America, one paycheck is not enough. You need the husband and wife both collecting pay, supporting the household, working together. In Canada, we estimate that the cost of living without any housing costs is about $1,200 Canadian a month. This is per person. So it's just under $15,000 a year, and this includes food, clothing, and medicines. The average household size in Canada is 3 people, which means households require at least $45,000 a year per family to survive. Remember, before housing costs. The median household income in Canada is $55,000 a year. This means families have an additional $10,000 remaining for housing costs. So most families have about $830 a month to pay for that housing. Families that make less than this are basically begging in the communities for social aid assistance. They live off the food banks, the charities, and they're already overextended. People are being abandoned into homelessness or are refusing to have children to save the extra $15,000 a year to pay their own housing costs without a child. So, housing costs are directly affecting the birth rates in Canada. Canada's birth rate sits at about 1.4 children per woman. So, most of us are being denied children just to survive. The housing costs are too high. But we're good people. We make good decisions and we don't create orphans that fall into the system. This makes it easier for us to manage the children that don't have support. In Canada, we have about 50,000 orphans that we've sponsored into families who choose to take care of them. We achieve this because the community works together to not create those more lives and bring more people into the community that we cannot support. That's the general Canadian way, to work together. I'll come back to birth rates and orphans a little later on. For now, let's get back to the housing crisis. Houses on average cost about $1 million in Canada. Our way of approaching loans was we were supposed to pay off a mortgage for working 25 years. So if we divide the cost over that time, we're estimating you pay about $40,000 a year just to purchase the house. Now most people don't have that kind of money to buy a house outright, which is fine because our banks were making money off people by collecting interest on mortgage loans. The banks created jobs and paid people within the community to access resources. We kind of didn't want people to pay for properties outright. The average mortgage loan in Canada is $340,000. The most an individual household was supposed to acquire was 4 times their income. So to get this mortgage, you needed to make at least $85,000 a year. Giving someone more money than this meant they were never going to pay it back. They were considered a bad investment. You don't lend people money you're not going to see back. When the bank owns over 50% of the house, if the bank thinks you can't pay for it because you haven't been paying the mortgage, then they have a legal argument to pressure the government to sell your house to reclaim their investment. Employers that lose money cut jobs. So signing a loan fraudulently at a bank while working there, you're stealing and hurting your own chances at keeping your job. Meaning, there are a lot of mortgage scams going on today trying to acquire houses that people cannot afford, with these criminals not intending to pay it back. If they find out you've purchased something with someone else's money, then they freeze your assets in order to repay back the victims. This is basically saying that the rising housing costs are contributing to increases in financial crimes. Okay, so back to what it costs. The average interest rate on a mortgage is 6%. So for that average loan size, you're looking to be paying about $21,000 a year just in interest on that loan. It will decrease over time as you pay the principal down. In addition to the banks, we pay the government money to lease the land we live on. That money goes into public services within our communities like education, healthcare, trash removal, road services. Property taxes for a house could be anywhere between $3,000 and $10,000 a year. It really depends on the size and valuation of the property. Basically, the more you pay for the house, the more you're going to be taxed on it. So the rising housing costs adds to the rising taxes costs. You'll see in the community foreign citizens are acquiring properties, but they don't want to pay the taxes on them. When this happens, the government puts a lien on the property, and when it exceeds a certain amount, they basically force a sale of the house to claim the money back. So make sure you pay your taxes. Remember, you set that tax rate yourself by severely overbidding to claim the house. You chose to live in Canada rather than somewhere else. There's also utilities. This is your heating, your water, and your electricity. It typically costs around $4,000 to $8,000 a year. The larger the space you have, the more people you have living with you, the more it's going to cost. Bigger houses have more space, therefore you've got more air to heat. Depending on your heating solution, it could add natural gas, electric, oil, or propane consumption to your community's resources pool. The more people living there, the more electronics equipment they might have, and the more water they're going to need to use. So, in general, the more houses you have, you need more power plants and water supply to support it. When you add new houses, it's increasing the cost of the utilities, because the utilities resource pool does not increase in size. We have set environmental consumption limits on those resources to promote sustainability and protect our country's water and air quality. We don't want our rivers and lakes to dry up. We don't want the air we breathe to create health problems. Our tree supply is also important to human survival of the entire planet. Plants basically absorb carbon dioxide and release oxygen. Humans and animals breathe in the oxygen and release the carbon dioxide. We're supposed to live in balance with our environment. In order to build new housing, we have to cut down those trees. Global warming rises, affecting agriculture and drought across the planet, impacting human survival. the more risk to our environment by using a utility or building material, the more expensive those things get. So simply put, adding new houses is going to increase the cost of all of these things. Okay, so I'm sure there are a lot of people's heads out there exploding, trying to keep up with me to figure out what is the actual household income you need to support families on average. Don't worry, I've done the math for you. It's basically an income of $117,000 to $124,000 a year. Now, this is a huge problem in Canada because we know the median income of a family is $55,000 a year. Our businesses, the government, and employers cannot afford to pay every family this much money, but everyone wants to survive and have a house. Only 1 in 3 Canadians come close to being able to afford their own home. There's no way any amount of job salary increases on the existing job market is going to bring our families up to this amount. So the problem we're seeing is the housing costs are simply not acceptable for the Canadian job market. If you total up all our non-housing costs and our utility costs, we're only left with $5,000 a month to spend on housing. This means we need a population of people who can buy property outright without paying any mortgage interest. This is problematic because if the banks aren't earning interest on mortgage money, then they can't support the jobs to pay employees to keep people affording housing. So somebody out there thought, why don't we just have all the employed folks rent then? I'll get back to why this is a very bad idea in a little while, but let's start there. In order to rent a property, tenants need to prove a certain amount of income. They still need to be employed. So, how many houses on average can we support in the community? We know we have 20 million jobs in Canada. Most households require 2 working spouses to support it. So, we have 10 million houses that can be filled by owning or renting. How many houses do we currently have? Well, Canada has 15 million houses. So, who's occupying the other 5 million houses? Are they all empty? Well, the short answer is no, they're not empty. Canada has 2.5 million senior citizens. Let's assume that they're living retired in their own homes if both spouses are still alive, and they might be in a retirement home or with a child if one has passed. So we'll estimate and say on average we might have 1.25 million houses with retired seniors in them. We have 2.2 million temporary residents. If, on average, household sizes are 3 people, this means we've got potentially 730,000 houses filled with non-Canadian citizens. In addition, there's about 200,000 Airbnb vacation rentals for tourism. So this leaves us with an oversupply of almost 3 million houses that nobody can afford to pay for by working in Canada. So hold on a second. If we've got so many extra houses, why is there a crisis? Why does housing cost so much? Simply put, false propaganda. What happened was we had a slowdown or recession of the job market once we had enough houses for our population. The real estate builders and realtors who were making a lot of money in this market wanted to keep making money. They decided if they couldn't find Canadian buyers for these houses, they'd look for wealthy investors from outside of Canada. They went out in the globe and spread marketing materials and propaganda in foreign countries. They claimed you'd be able to find a renter or come to Canada to become Canadian. Most of the folks doing this are not Canadian citizens. They are foreign-born realtors, or foreign-born builders, or foreign-born organized criminals. Some are foreign-born immigration lawyers, or foreign-born folks working in companies or in foreign recruitment firms. Basically, the trend is you've got a bunch of foreign interference in the real estate market, trying to sell Canadian land out from under us for a profit. And the Canadians aren't actually seeing any benefit to this. no Canadian owner ever existed for most of these properties. They're all newly built. The realtor you interacted with was foreign, and he was working with a foreign builder or contractor. So don't believe the foreign propaganda you hear when they tell you Canadians walked away with your money. It wasn't the Canadians. So we've now got an angry foreign community complaining about going broke, paying larger costs than the local citizens, and an angry local community blaming them for doing it by stealing all our houses. They're basically overbidding to make sure the local people can't have those properties. So nobody's happy with this situation. So we're seeing a steady influx of foreign peoples buying properties, looking to fill them with their own family members instead of local citizens. Remember, we didn't have the jobs to support the houses before they got here. So the foreigners occupying them are seriously looking at having to live here without having jobs. So how can these families expect to pay for the houses? A lot of these houses are purchased by international students. These people claim that they have study and work permits, that they're supposed to be allowed to work towards citizenships in Canada. Remember, we've got 1 in 3 Canadians today who are legally allowed to work that can't access a job. So most folks in the community do not believe that this paperwork is legit. Let's say someone did sign a paper without realizing the mistake. If this many people are out of work, we strongly believe that those permits should be revoked. There is absolutely no way the community can fill them. Excess houses sold to foreign citizens creates more unemployment. More people means more demand on jobs. Jobs are not being created in this country. They're being cut. So you've got foreign citizens looking around at the local peoples, deciding, if we won't give them jobs, they'll just take ours. What we're seeing today is new Canadian foreigners working in industry are creating a job blockade. They're picking fights with coworkers, they're claiming racism, they're trying to get local folks fired to make way for more people of their own race. They're pushing diversity laws to require you to hire more from their race, from foreign countries, over our multicultural group of local workers already dependent on this country. They're sabotaging business contracts. They're pushing things overseas, trying to claim our workers aren't as good as foreign assets or as cheap. But they're costing more and more and more for these services, and we're not getting the same quality levels we saw before. These people want the jobs. They want to pay for the houses that they've bought from us, and they aren't above displacing local workers, employing corrupt HR, and being assholes, essentially, to put Canadians on the streets. Nobody these days seems to care what's happening with Canadians. They're openly practicing anti-white racism, trying to claim it's okay if you attack a white person, because there's tons of white people in Canada. Most Canadian citizens find that term offensive. Every time we apply to a job, we're asked what our race is. We see everyone else's race broken down into racial traditional groupings, but we're just one big bucket of white. The reason they are doing this is another form of racial propaganda. They're attempting to racially appropriate. Foreigners try to devalue local citizens by claiming that you need to hire them just because you need to show more of their skin color. Because for some reason that's more important than being able to do the job or having a legal status. It's basically an attempt for a new Canadian to cut the line in front of somebody else who's already in the country. If a minority was born in Canada, they would have been subjected to the same skills requirements as the rest of the community. They would have had as much chance as everyone else. So the only ones needing to spread woke diversity propaganda are actually foreign citizens, or minority-based communities where the propaganda actually results in them being hired, against any sort of common sense. The community being hurt by this propaganda is that big old bucket of white folks born in Canada. These are the folks who are actually being subjected to racism right now. It's not the foreigners. If you ask a second-generation multicultural Canadian whether or not they feel woke diversity propaganda helped them to find jobs, most of them will tell you, no, it did not. We have an influx of Islamic, Hindu, Sikh, and Eastern Asian communities using their excessive wealth, which exceeds the Canadian wealth levels, to outbid and outbribe realtors and builders to acquire housing. These are the folks applying pressures in industry to take those jobs. You will also see wealthy foreigners from Africa, Latin America, Europe, and the US doing the same thing in smaller numbers. The commonality is they're all foreign. Most of these people will not be able to find jobs. To get around the problem, they're trying to use their properties which they've purchased to create wealth that they can live off of. One way of doing this is to extract living wages out of the local working tenants by renting properties. They have set their rental rates high enough to pay for their cost of living without them working. Remember why I said renting couldn't work? The current cost of living is $1,200 a month in Canada without the housing. So this is why we're seeing rental rates on average sitting around $2,500 a month, and they're continuing to climb. As private unemployed owners raise their rental rates, the rest of the existing landowners and corporations who own rental units figure we can make the same profits. We should be allowed to, right? We're seeing a rise of the corruption trying to get long-term tenants out of their housing to charge more rent. This is bogging down our court systems and bankrupting folks who've purchased houses with tenants in them because they can't get them out of there. It's increasing the amount of squatters who don't pay rent. Now, if you really think about it, what we're seeing here is the principle of basic slavery. You have a landowner who does not contribute anything to the household except claiming to own it. They're taking all of the workers' earnings and putting it towards their own standard and quality of living, and they're in a much nicer house than the one you rent from them. As a renter, you can't get sick, you can't get married, you can't have children, nothing in your rental unit can break, and you absolutely cannot lose your job, or you will be abandoned to homelessness. You'll have no savings, and now you're living off the community support or on the streets. We abolished slavery in 1836 or 37, if I recall correctly. We acknowledge this formula doesn't work. So why are we going back to that? We have a bunch of rental properties being held by investors who are bankrupting essentially our employed workers. They have increased costs imposed on them by people who are outside their household trying to control their lives. So what do the renters do? Some squat. Some leave these properties and go to the cheapest place they can. Some people move back home. There is an increasing trend in the community to ask for more salary increases and promote more job security. This means the businesses have to charge more for their goods and services in order to pay their existing workforce. The cost of living rises across the community, or they're forced to cut the business out entirely for the people who don't want to buy those goods and services anymore. This results in the cutting of jobs to pay for only the remaining needed workers to fill the lower level of demand on the business. Less jobs means less houses that we can support. Okay, so we've got less renters now in the renting pool. These unemployed landowners can't afford to reduce their rental rates. But there are so many rental units on the market and not enough renters to fill them. Now what do? These people start setting up migrant refugee charities. They're hoping to get the community's sympathy in creating bunkhouses. They house up to 25 new foreign citizens from their culture, expecting to find them work. Or, get paid for housing them here, instead of in their home countries. They're asking the community for donations to pay for them and all these people. But these charities are asking for money for one racial grouping. Many people find this racist. They're supporting foreigners and not the local homeless we already have. What about our elderly? What about our veterans? What about our homeless big old bucket of white people? So these individuals are basically adding to the overpopulation problem in our communities by using folks from back home and increasing our unemployment problem. And I don't know if you'll notice, but a lot of these people they're using are wearing nicer clothing than we have, acting more entitled, and they seem to be treating us like they are wealthy people. They don't seem to be poor people. Many folks don't want to support the charities anymore. I mean, why ship in new homeless poor people when we've got a lot of it already? The amount of community funding is drying up, while the demand for it is increasing. So these bunkhouses popping up don't actually get funded. When the tenants can't pay their rent, their landlords threaten to evict them. The crime rates increase because petty and major theft is occurring to pay these folks' bills. The landlords are turning a blind eye because, hey, at least they're trying to reclaim their investment. Now, as crime starts to increase, we notice the faces of the peoples committing the crime. The common trait is that they're foreign. These races that we see more often are getting associated with being problems. The local communities know who's the problem. They start socially rejecting people for their race, blaming them for the hardships on their communities. This leads to more conflict. Racialized communities start fighting amongst each other, trying to divvy up Canadian jobs and resources, while still excluding local-born Canadians. They are still practicing anti-white racism, as well as hurting racialized communities their peoples back home disliked from their original traditional beliefs. Now, the locals are afraid they're losing their jobs and their houses to a community of foreign folks who are targeting them for their race using woke propagandas. They're trying to attack or steal either by standing in the way of their jobs, by stealing their households, or by attacking their businesses. There are legal folks who look similar to the foreign invaders facing racial prejudices. They're getting accused of being the problem too. Now, some of these people were born in Canada, but the community is seeing their people defend the new folks of the same race, trying to justify their crimes. By participating with them in the blockade, they're being associated with being a problem as well. Frustrated peoples are lashing out at each other, and we're seeing more community disputes and racialized hate crimes than ever before. So, great. What do we do? How do we fix this problem? Simply put, we need folks to create sustainable businesses to support the creation of new jobs in Canada without importing or hiring any more foreign citizens. We do not want to make the overpopulation worse. The problem with this is we're seeing increased crime rates, racism, attacks and extortions on business owners and existing community members, and many folks are simply unwilling to create businesses to be forced to hire foreign peoples in a sea of foreign corruption. So if we're not going to be able to increase the number of jobs in our job market without leveraging foreign peoples, then we're going to have to do something about the housing market instead. First thing we need to do is to stop creating new houses. We need to remove the excess foreign population or the newest illegal hires to reduce the current unemployment levels. This will bring down crime and the costs on the community. We need the folks who are working in Canada to be able to pay for the housing here. Most people in the community think that any problem foreigners should go. You'll hear cries of, deport them, get them out of here, send them back home. This is the community telling you that they do not support criminals. The people living in the bunkhouses, who are adding crazy amounts of excess demand on jobs per household, need to go. They're not going to find work. These facilities need to be shut down. Our renters don't see the need to pay foreigners so that they can have a wonderful life elsewhere by not working, while our families starve in Canada by working like slaves. We know the foreign landowners cannot afford to rent properties at reasonable rates. They're not working, and we cannot offer them our jobs. We need those to survive. So we need the foreigners to leave the rental market. They can live on their own savings without renting or working. That is acceptable. Or they can sell their houses for the real value of the property and leave the country. Any empty properties need to be sold. These are intended for someone to live in. Now, here's where it starts getting tense and the conflict starts occurring, because these foreigners don't want to go. But you have to remember, the government lied to Canadians. These people lied to Canadians. They told us that these foreign peoples were hired instead of our own because we needed them. They hid all of the community members who were begging for jobs that were experienced and qualified from our businesses. These people were not going to practice organized crimes. They were not going to steal from us. They were going to work beside us. These people were not going to increase our cost of living. We don't want to be pressured to hire foreign citizens anymore. The realtors, the builders, the government, you all lied to us saying our houses were worth something. They're not worth anything. We don't want to be forced to pay a ton of money for something that has no value to anyone, because it's just going to sit there empty or filled with a criminal or another squatter. The local community would advise you look at the employed new Canadian foreigners and start working backwards in time. Start with the most recent arrivals, dismiss them, and return the jobs back to the local Canadian workers who they've been picking fights with and lying about. Keep doing this until our unemployment levels are back to what they were supposed to be in Canada. We know there's going to be a lot of complaints from foreign communities. They claim they're dependent on Canada too. They say they have citizenships. They should be allowed to call themselves Canadian. Most people in the community believe if a person acquired a citizenship by working illegally and lying about unemployment levels, then you were not assigned a citizenship legally. A foreigner lying to a foreigner, lying to us, to hire a foreigner to bring them to Canada is not a Canadian citizen's problem. Many countries revoke citizenships. Why not us too? The Canadians support people who help their communities. This is not helping our community. We don't need racist foreigners creating blockades, excluding Canadians from their own homes. The community is reaching its breaking point. We're seeing more rallies, more riots, more peaceful protests than we have seen in a very long time in Canada from the local communities. The only fair way of approaching this problem is to look at their place in line. The people born here have been waiting their entire lives for a job in this country. Their families are dependent on being able to access resources here. Whatever God a person believes in caused foreign folks to be born elsewhere, not in Canada. We did not give them approval to be here. Someone of their own background did. They tried to gaslight us, convince us, no, you gave us permission. It was totally you, not us, totally you. When we told them no, they decided, you know what, we're going to do what we want and work around you. They brought themselves here because they didn't believe us when we told them it wasn't going to work out. Lo and behold, it didn't. We didn't get to choose to screen them. They screened themselves. They lied, they cheated, they stole, and we should not be punished by all of the problems that they've created by trying to interfere with our housing market. They got caught, so they should bear the burden of the consequences. The foreign landlords applied pressure on the government, and the foreign builders and the foreign realtors destroyed the Canadian economy pretty much single-handedly by practicing racial appropriation and working around the Canadian peoples. Pretty much everything we're suffering today is caused by the increasing of the housing supply that we cannot support. So let's stop things from getting worse and try to set things right. We need to protect Canadian citizens and give our children a better future. We do not want to commit to turning Canada into an overpopulated, environmentally damaged third world country. Just because a group of problematic attitude individuals from foreign countries want to bully us because they've already done this to themselves elsewhere and they really, really, really need to be here and live off us. Some of these folks that are abusing the system are incredibly wealthy. If someone needs to pay back some debt, why don't we get some of them to do it? Now, Canada owes the Canadian people, just like they claim they owe the native peoples. They're also appropriating our land and hurting our people. This is not something that was done in the past. This is something these people are doing directly to us right now. We're not asking for money without working for it. We're asking for legal support in defending ourselves from a foreign invasion that is occurring now. Have we not learned anything from history? The Canadian people want their jobs back. They want to survive. They want their own housing. It's our basic human rights. So we would gladly accept funding to create businesses if you give us a protected environment where we don't have to fear foreign racism, crime, and interference. We'll take that money and set up local Canadian reservations somewhere in Canada if you folks would prefer that. We'll create our own cities and we'll keep all the foreigners out of it. This is what they did for the natives, is it not? We too were born to this land. We too are having our resources stolen and usurped. What's the difference? Well, there are a lot more of us than there are natives or foreigners. 70% of Canada are local-born white people. So why isn't Canada working with us instead of foreign communities? The foreigners had no sympathy for us, so they're finding we are getting less and less sympathy for them in return. If we step back and go, okay, fine, no favoritism, let's play this fair. If you got here last, you fell off the end of the line and got caught trying to cut it. Done. Simple. Fair. If we can get that job market under control again and back in Canadian hands, with no more salary increases or cost of living increase spirals, what is the real cost of the houses then? Based on the income that people are earning today, what is the real value of the properties? Small dwellings have property taxes of about $3,000 a year. Utilities, $4,000. We estimate the cost of living at $15,000 per person. This means they spend $22,000 a year before the cost of the building and the mortgage interest. They'll have about $33,000 a year to support a single dweller in a condo of one-bedroom size on the medium income in Canada. The cost of the house will be the down payment plus the mortgage principal. If we divide all of this over the 25 years, including its 6% interest on that mortgage, we'll find the value we need. Let's say that the mortgage principal approaches the full cost of the house, meaning there's little to no available down payment. If we have a couple living at a medium of $55,000 a year, they'd be looking for a one-bedroom solution costing $180,000. If they wanted to have a child, they would need a one-bedroom plus den or two-bedroom solution at $30,000 a year. This is not going to happen, so your family is likely not choosing to have children unless they can earn more money. For a family pulling in $85,000 a year, you'd be looking at a 1-bedroom plus den or 2-bedroom solution for $330,000. And these folks are just barely affording that child. Most folks cannot afford mortgages over $340,000. So in order to move up to a multi-generational 3rd-bedroom or 4-bedroom home, you have to merge 2 existing households. If your parent has paid off a 1-bedroom plus den or 2-bedroom solution to raise you, then merging a household with them would allow you to have a 3-bedroom or 4-bedroom home when you take employment. This means those housing solutions will be worth as much as double a smaller solution, which means $660,000. We can see most families don't have homes in Canada because the homes that exist here are being held hostage by foreign owners. They're trying to gaslight folks into believing they're worth more so they can flip them to create quick profits and live off our communities without contributing anything to them. It's a game of cruel hot potato where the last fool holding the property when the bubble bursts will be screwed and locked into that property. They'll basically lose their investments. And we know this is coming soon. There is no demand for homes compared to the supply of jobs in the country. If anyone tells you otherwise, they are lying. These people are not being ethical and they do not care about the consequences on Canada or you. They are abusing the housing market. We need banks to be allowed to sell empty properties at the remaining values on their mortgage, especially if they're held by foreign citizens. They need to be sold to whatever local citizen thinks they can afford to pay for it. Locals who are employed can afford to rent at more reasonable rent rates. If we cannot drop the rental rates to $800 for a 1-bedroom solution, then we cannot even rent to house our own people. We do not have the funds to pay for global poverty. Canada already has a huge deficit. Let's look at China. We're already starting to see the similarities in our job markets. House building is not being finished and they're basically being burned down in Canada. Builders are going bankrupt and nobody wants to pay for the mortgages on unfinished properties. We don't want what happened in Asia to happen to us. Let's reduce the damage by not making the problem worse. So far, you'll notice I've been looking at Canada specifically. This is because I have access to information in Canada. But every country is going to have the same problem. The globe is overpopulated. If your country isn't creating the overpopulation, then you're seeing an influx of peoples from countries that are creating that overpopulation. As the global population rises, we see increases in poverty, crime, resource starvation, and wars over land and resources. We are also seeing global warming pushing our planet to the brink. We're going to start seeing an increased rejection of the concept of migration. There's going to be increased pressures on the countries producing it to deal with their own population problems. For every country, the population numbers, the job amounts, the cost of living, the average salary in our calculations will be different. But if you followed along with how I did this, you might be able to calculate the housing affordability costs for your country too. So, which countries are the leading contributors to overpopulation today? There are 29 countries in Africa that have birth rates of over 4 children per woman. Though their numbers are coming down, the numbers are still between 4 and 7. It's basically population explosion. Regionally, they're the leading cause of global overpopulation, but they're not the only ones. Any country with a birth rate of over 2 is going to be contributing to the problem. Some countries claim their birth rates are in check. They're below 2, they aren't the problem, it's not us. We're finding some of these countries are hiding overpopulation within orphanages. These children are attributed to no parent and aren't included in the birth rates. When I was looking at Iran, for example, their orphanage numbers were completely hidden. I laughed as my computer threatened me with viruses and compromising attacks if I continued to look into the problem. There were rumors of slavery, sex trafficking, and claims that these aren't Iranian children, so we can get a feel for how overpopulating countries are trying to displace their population problem between each other rather than working within their communities to resolve it. These abandoned children are looking to foreign communities to support them because their local communities aren't. And foreign communities don't really want to do that anymore. They can't handle the population size they have. In 2023, there were 153 million orphans globally. These kids were abandoned by war, sickness, poverty, and by parents who simply had children who they did not want. There are 52 million orphans in Africa. South Asia has 40 million. 30 million of those are in India, which is the largest contribution of any country on the global orphan population. Latin America reports 10 million, and there are estimates of 5 million between Iraq and Syria in the Middle East. The US has 3.2 million orphans, the Philippines have 2, the European Union has 1, Indonesia has 500,000, China has 160,000, Turkey reports 110,000, and in Canada we have 50. The rest of them are spread throughout the globe. The takeaway from these numbers is no country has 0 orphans. We all have our own community children to support. We don't really feel we need foreign children. So if you hear, "Oh my God, our birth rates are declining, we need more migration," this is bullshit. It is false propaganda. What's causing the decrease in birth rates is the lack of resources in the community. Adding more people to the community is going to make the problem worse. What is the leading cause of orphans? Well, it's men. Sorry guys, but the male libido and desire for sex without understanding the consequence of it is the leading cause of creating unwanted children. It's the men pressuring the women for sex. Now, some men in some cultures blame the women for being promiscuous or practicing prostitution, but you have to remember these women are profiteering on men. They're not profiteering on women. Without the males demanding the sex, they wouldn't be able to sell their bodies for it, so the women are not the problem here. In many countries, men are the ones who control the household resources. They have to approve the decision to have or keep a child. Most orphanages across the world report that children are dropped off by men. Certain religions prevent aborting life, and you made the mistake and got pregnant, now you're stuck using resources to support a life you can't afford. Some of these kids get abandoned instead of having real lives. Other religions and racial traditions apply pressure to have male children. You're not guaranteed that you're going to have a son in the first 5 attempts. Large families occur with many daughters. It's the men pushing for having the son, not the women. So you'll see sexism, abuse, and abandonment of female children. Sometimes they punish their spouses for producing children of the wrong gender. If your God gave you a daughter and wasn't giving you a son, maybe they were trying to tell you you weren't meant to have one. Why are you trying to get around your religion and ignore your community and family's needs to keep population down by having so many children? Simply put, if you don't want children or you can't afford them, you probably shouldn't be having them. If you do not have adequate birth control, maybe try abstaining from sex. Things will not change in the world unless we work together. You have to educate your children at an early age about sex and birth control. Teach them how to make better sex and family planning decisions. Avoid creating orphans. Because the orphans are the ones who will be looking around for someone to help them, or cause wealthier folks to flee their crimes. Maybe more religions need to start considering vasectomies as a possible prevention of unwanted births. It does not harm the man or his sex drive, it just prevents the creation of children without destroying an existing life. Maybe this is a good compromise. If you do want kids, remember wherever you choose to have them, that choice is going to affect you down the road. By leaving the place you were born and trying to go somewhere else, you are creating conflict in the world within a community who already has their own people struggling for resources. Try to work with your existing communities to fix your birth homes in a way that doesn't hurt the surrounding global communities. Make more responsible choices for your family. We are all suffering globally from overpopulation, and as much as we'd like to, we know we can't save everyone. Sometimes it's just going to be the luck of the draw where we ended up being born. Maybe it was meant as a life lesson to apply pressure for peoples to learn to behave differently. We should stop letting people try to work around learning that lesson. Sorry for being the bearer of doom and gloom this week. I'm sure I'll have a million comments calling me horrid racial slurs and names because the foreign community doesn't want to be caught being the problem. Well, I'm sorry guys, but in most cases, you are the problem. I hope everyone learned something today. Until next time.